Okay. Hi everyone. And I confirm that I'm audible and visible. Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh,
And we
awesome.
can see you too.
Okay, great. Let's hope that my network is good enough to entertain video today. Um, so my name is Eze. I'm not entirely sure the people who are on the group and what the experience is. Although I know I've seen a couple of very familiar names. So, but for those who do not know, my name is Eze. I'm a debater from Nigeria, Africa, because I think that's obvious. Chairperson of the ADC Council. I don't know why, if that is the reason why I was given the topic to talk about integration of the entire continent, like I'm some AU chairman. Um, our conversation today is going to be a lot more debate centered in the sense that, particularly, I'm an individual who has um, a stronger pathway, if I may say, for economic motions because people tend to want to fall for the trap of, um, doing a lot of economic jargon when they are debating economic motions and kind of gets very boring and very confusing. So I sometimes just like to avoid it. However, when I'm forced to debate those, the approach I use is to try to be the most simplistic thing, um, like in the round or in the tournament. So what that means, for example, is while every other person is trying to, muster all the economic jargon that they can, I'm trying to like make that as simple as possible for judges. Particularly because I think that the way I have apathy to those jargons, the same way I assume most other judges who are not economic majors also would have it. So my conversation with you guys today is going to largely be around, layman approach for the integration of African economies, and then specifically through the AFCTA and other sort of currency unions. Maybe we'll just breezing on it. One, because there's been very little conversations going on around currency unions in Africa, but more importantly, because it is also like a subset of like economic integration in the continent. So when you have successful regional integration, the like an offshoot of that sometimes is currency union or like same currency or whatever else that might exist. So let's dive straight into it. I have to give a trigger warning anyway. Even though I like to take breaks from my debating experience, like maybe a few months before I speak again, I've still been told oftentimes that I speak too fast. So I'm trying to work on that. So apologies if I'm faster than you can manage. But feel free to maybe either text and say you can't hear me or I'm too fast, I should slow down, or just unmute yourself and let me know that my speed is excess. But as you can see, I'm trying to be slower than usual. So today, understanding the nuances of integrating African economies through the AFCTA. A couple of things then in definition. Let's talk about what this sort of integration means. Like generally, regional integration. There's a saying we used last year when we were organizing the PAUDC. We used that on the flyer. Umoja ni nguvu, utengano ni udhaifu. It's a Swahili saying that simply means, united we stand and divided we fall. I think if I need to bring, you know, African integration or regional integration anywhere into a very simple phrase, a very simple sentence, it will be that, right? The idea that countries want to come together, coagulate, right? Form an arrangement between them just so they can, attain some sort of benefit that we're going to talk about. But a more academic definition is that it's an arrangement, between two or more countries through formal regional rules. Um, Through formal regional rules um, and institutions. So there are a number of objectives for which integrations may want to happen. Number one is to try and overcome, barriers to the flow of goods and services. Reducing those barriers. Some of them can be tariff-based barriers. I think that is pretty much obvious. But there are also non-tariff-based barriers. So anything like that directly or indirectly impedes, the free flow of goods, services, capital, and people. Those are the kind of things that regional integration seeks to overcome. Those barriers are the kind of things that we want to overcome. We're going to talk about some of those barriers in a bit. Also, there's an objective of trying to share, um, or manage shared resources. So the idea is, if we are all in this group and we decide to act independently, we might be cheated out on international scene because probably the amount of money I have individually is very tiny. But if we all gathered all our money together and then we had a significant pool, then that would mean we can then have a bigger bargaining power. So let me give an instance. Um, um, Kenya, or yeah, Rwanda rather, for example, was ranked one of the fastest growing economies in the world. I think between 2019, just before COVID-19 happened to everyone, Rwanda was one of the fastest growing economies in the world. But when you look at the size of the Rwandan economy, it is ranked 143rd out of 193 economies in the entire world. So which means that for smaller countries or countries with smaller economies, the bargain is usually very difficult for them. It's very hard for them to try to integrate or try to get the most out of trade, either internationally or like locally within the continent in themselves. But when you combine all the like trading capacity, all the the economic strength of all 54 countries, within Africa, what you would have would be the eighth largest economy in the world with about $2.5 trillion, right, and about 1.2 billion customers, like potential customers within that scenario. So what it means ultimately is that this is one of the biggest reasons why people want to form integrate trade areas or whatever else, but try to integrate amongst each other because of the idea that when we are together, we are stronger, we can bully better, or we can negotiate better, whatever else is the objective for them. Then there's also the benefit of achieving peace and security within the region. Although later on when we talk about challenges, we're going to talk about how the instability within many countries in Africa, like there's been a lot of coups happening in Africa right now. Ethiopia is burning up. There's Boko Haram in Nigeria, and all of such things. Those insecurities are, all those issues themselves actually are a barrier that you need to overcome. So when we talk about non-tariff barriers, insecurity, corruption, and all those other things also include those non-tariff barriers that make it difficult for goods, services, and people to navigate across borders. Then I think that integration, generally regional integration, is often motivated by a number of things. It could be economic reasons, like I already established, because we want to have a stronger economic bloc, or they could be political reasons, right? So, political alliances want to be formed. You're trying to make friends, or like generally have some more bargaining power when you go to political institutions like in the UN and all of these things. And then there could also be other strategic factors, right? Some of them are usually just geographic. A lot of people have gone into it, particularly within Africa. Most of it's like regional economic commissions or committees that you have are usually based upon um, like geographical proximity. So things like ECOWAS, for example, largely because we're all close by, and then it makes sense. We're all in the West African sub-region, so it makes sense for us to be in some sort of economic union and try to foster things. There's also the EAC, East African, I think, community. There's SADC region and all of this. So most of them are usually just guided by the idea of um, like proximity, like geographic proximity. We're close to each other, then therefore we must be friends, or we should be friends ideally. So, but the bulk of our discussion today is going to largely be on what the stages of regional integration look like, right? What are the stages of regional integration? Ideally, there are 5 stages of regional integration, right? I'm just going to read them through, and then we'll discuss them individually. 1 is free trade. 2 is customs union. 3 is common markets. While 4 is economic union, and 5 is political union, right? So we are trying to discuss integration either on a continental or subcontinental level. You are usually looking at one or more of these, 5 areas. it might be important to know that all the buzz around AFCFTA is largely just on free trade, largely. Like we're just at number 1/5, which is like the smallest. In fact, if there has to be a graph, free trade needs to be small right here, and then customs union, and then the other one until you get a political union. So we're just like in the smallest first step of the pyramid. That is free trade in itself. But let's talk about what these stages of economic integration look like. One is, like I said, free trade. So this looks like reducing tariffs between member states. Like that is the major indices of the, or major index rather, of the AFCTA, which is simply to say, you know what, let's reduce tariff between trade, like when we're trading amongst each other. So, and I think the percentage around 90%, which was the consensus that was reached in that meeting in 2019. So the idea is basically to say when a country, a member state of the free trade area is trying to push her goods to the international community, like to the other member states, those goods should have very reduced, like little to no tariff at all. So it should be almost free because they said 90%, which is like almost free to push your goods from Nigeria to Ghana, for example, or all the way to Tanzania or to Southern Africa. So the idea is simple. Let's take away tariffs as much as possible because that's like the biggest or most talked about barrier to free trade largely. Every country wants to make money from things that are coming in, into their own borders. So whatever goods that come in, countries just slam tariffs on it just so that they can make money. Particularly if it's a good that is largely wanted. So if you have the markets, which is what Nigeria does oftentimes, because there's a huge market, 200 million population. So when there are goods that are coming in, then you try to make the most out of that. In fact, Nigeria largely over the past couple of years under Buhari's administration has largely been trying to tax their way out of poverty, which is or economists would say it's not a very sustainable thing to do. But that's what free trade means, right? Trying to reduce those tariffs and so that the exchange of goods and also services themselves can be easier. Um, the second stage then is customs union. And the way the stages work is that the higher stage actually includes the first stage itself. So when you have a customs union, it means that you must first and foremost have had a free trade area or free trade agreement. So a customs union is like an additional bar on top of what's already existing in the free trade area. Um, Customs union simply means you have common external tariffs. So if you are going to place tariffs or trade taxes on goods and services coming in from outside the free trade area, let's say like yes, there's Africa generally now. So in the event where this is implemented successfully, if you are going to bring in goods from outside Africa, is that for me? Okay. If you are going to bring in goods from outside Africa, the idea would be that the tariff that those companies would pay, um, let's say Bajaj from India bringing in their tricycles, which is very popular now in Africa. So if Bajaj is going to bring in those tricycles or vehicles, then the idea is that the tariff we place on them will be common. So whether Bajaj is supplying to Nigeria or Tanzania or Kenya or Ghana, the idea would be that the tariff would be the same because now you have one customs union, like all of you believe in is the same custom ideology. So your trade policies or fiscal policies, particularly around trade taxes, would be uniform or homogeneous. Somebody keeps on meeting. Am I audible? Am I audible? Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Somebody keeps meeting themselves. That Similarly, please mute yourself. Oh, great. So that's that about customs union. The third level of economic integration then is a common market. And this is largely characterized by free movement of capital and services, right? There might be occasionally different national regulations, but the idea is literally that you look at yourselves in the block or in the free trade area as just a singular market. So now there's nothing like the Nigerian market or the Ghanaian market, it's just the African market that exists. So movement like goods literally would be seen, even though there are still, like I said, national regulations, but goods largely would be seen as coming from Africa, right? Goods you export will be seen as coming from Africa, not necessarily not particularly branded to promote just one country's interest and all of those things. So that's the third level, having a common market, having free movement. So there are zero restrictions about remember what happens in free trade area is a reduction in tariffs, and it doesn't talk about non-tariff barriers. But in a common market, you now have like almost zero tariff happening within the free trade area. But more importantly, you also have like an elimination of other non-tariff barriers, right? So this includes, like I said, things like would I say what other non-tariff barriers now? I think I mentioned one earlier. Sanitary, there's something called phytosanitary restrictions as well. That is looking at the health impact of these products themselves. Then cultural differences as well, because there are some countries that refuse to import certain kind of products, particularly because of the cultural implication that it has. But we'll discuss that when we get to the issues of problems. But the point I'm trying to make is that in a common market, all of those barriers tend to be eliminated or at least drastically reduced. Then the fourth and perhaps one of the most successful ones, the ones we have examples for, is the economic union, right? Here, there are zero barriers for internal trade. There is free movement of labor. There is harmonized tax rates. There's common monetary and fiscal policies as well. I'm going to take that again in case anybody's writing. One, in an economic union, there are no barriers for internal trade, none at all. Um, in an economic union as well, there is the free movement of labor, so meaning that everyone sees themselves as a citizen of the free trade area or citizen of the integrated area now. So as Africa, we all see ourselves as Africans generally. So meaning if I have to travel from here to Ghana, probably there would be some sort of general passport that I possess that just identifies me as African largely. Um, that travel even outside West Africa, it will still be the same thing. No visa restrictions, whether on arrival or whatever, zero visa restrictions. It will just be almost seamlessly easy um, to get to like to move labor from country to country. So also there's going to be harmonized tax rates, right? I think this is like a very complex level of integration. Complex in the sense that it requires a lot of political will from the member states to do that. It means, for example, countries big or small have to come together and agree to have the same sort of fiscal policies or tax rates. So now there isn't going to be different tax rates in this country versus the other country, which means that most countries' financial departments or like ministries of finances would be working together in that economic union to have maybe centralized tax rates year after year, and also, like I said, the other option is common monetary and fiscal policies, right? So whether it's tariff, whether it is the decision on what goods need to be like promoted or produced more, what goods need to be cut down on, what goods we should stop importing. All of those policies themselves need to be done as a union now, not just as individual countries that are trying to align each other or become friends with each other. A typical example of this by now, I'm sure you are guessing, is the European Union, right? They are an economic union, and so most of these factors, most of these characteristics can be found in the European Union. No tariff for trade happening between the European Union states. There's always free movements. They are moving from one part of Europe or a member state, not just one part of Europe, because some countries are not member states. They are moving from a member state of the EU to another member state of the EU. Then that movement will be seamless. Then Yes, also, like I said, harmonized tax rates, the common monetary and fiscal policy. I think, as a matter of fact, the EU is trying to navigate towards the fifth and final level of economic integration. It's a political union, right? Even though they are not yet there yet, but with the formation of things like the EU Parliament, that's exactly what they're aiming for. So having an EU Parliament more or less means that you are governing the entire European Union as one government, right? So whatever policies or decisions that are passed in the EU are like the EU integrated body has to be replicated in all the member states and all of this. But um, like that in itself is not necessarily perfected within the European Union right now. But being an economic union, yes, the European Union, has been doing that for years. So I think that's that on um, the idea of like the stages of the economic integration that are possible. Like I said, some of them are complex, some of them are less complex. Free trade and customs union are very simple, which is like the AFTA. But for Africa specifically, which is what we're going to be discussing now, the nuances, for Africa, it's looking like it's a big issue to be done. I think we started discussing the issue of the AFTA in the meeting they had in Abuja. They had Abuja something they called it, but it was the AU meeting that held in Abuja in Nigeria. And that was as far back as 2014. That was when there was an agreement, okay, that we need to form something like this. We need to come together and use tariffs or barriers that prevent us from trading with each other and all of those things. So meaning that for Africa specifically, because of the challenges that we're going to be talking about, even though this is supposed to be a non-complex process, that's a free trade area, supposed to be a non-complex process, it is now almost looking like a very complex thing because it has taken years for the implementation. Even since 2017, that it was finally passed, countries are still struggling to ratify. Now there's just about 52 out of 55, which is an overwhelming consensus. But yet, among beyond just signing it, many countries haven't ratified it as well. There's less than 30 that have ratified out of the 52 that signed it initially. There's less than 30 that have ratified it. So meaning that the political will doesn't necessarily exist, and this is largely because of the differences that exist between the ideologies of these countries themselves. We might all be chanting Uhuru or whatever other sort of Pan African term we can coin, but in practice, right? In practice, there isn't really that much economic um, integration happening, or political integration rather happening, because you need to have that level of political integration for you to drive these sort of things, right? Countries need to love themselves enough to agree to do this sort of businesses. Like people need to be less selfish, or less self-centered to allow agree to do this. Then the more complex ones are having a common market and economic union, and then the very highly complex one is having a political union. Okay, then let's talk about why there has been this craze for regionalism. Why has there been a rise in regionalism? A number of reasons, right? That has led to that increase. It might be important to also note that for these regional integral bodies to be recognized, they have to be would I say WTO compliant. World Trade Organization needs to know and recognize them. I don't think the EU is the EU if they are not recognized by the World Trade Organization. Same thing with ECOWAS. When you get to form your own regional body, then because there's a general body that looks after trade in the entire world, WTO, they have to be informed about that. So one of the major reasons why there has been that rise in regionalism is something called the domino theory of regionalism. Simply meaning that countries want to just copy other countries, right? So after I think North America formed their own what's it called now, regional body or featured area, like as early as 1990s, early 1990s, it then like the successes were almost immediately evident, right? To see how much they could achieve as a general body. So most other countries just wanted to, or most other regions just wanted to, try this out and probably like enjoy the benefits of being together, enjoy the benefits of bringing your strengths together and trying to cover up every other person's weaknesses. There's also political factors, right? Like I said, some of them are largely because well, we need to be in a union so that we can get we can get back at these other people as well, right? So sometimes even countries' hatred or apathy for each other leads them to want to form, something beyond alliance. You already know that countries have alliances, so countries have allies all over the place. But because they need to solidify those alliances, make them stronger, oftentimes countries then go into, having free trade areas. Then, like I already said, there are also natural trading partners, which is like largely something called the gravity model, which is largely countries coagulating based upon their geographic location. So Ghana excludes Nigeria, let's be together. Benin Republic and Togo is in between. We don't have to be in one union and all of this. So those reasons equally exist. But before I move on this, it's important to like identify something I came across, a very fantastic term I came across, something called the spaghetti bowl. It's simply a theory that explains that countries could be in more than one regional bodies, can belong to more than one regional bodies at a time. In West Africa, this example may not be very evident, but if you look at things like Southern Africa and um, maybe Eastern Africa, but largely Southern Africa anyway, they have had like series of like bodies themselves. Even before the SADC itself, there was I think the Southern Maghreb region, which was largely Southern Africa and some other member states that were not necessarily within the geographical location of the Southern African region. So the idea is that countries just seek to form these free trade areas, even if they are not necessarily bounded by geographical borders. So that you don't assume that you need to be very close, can I be heard? Okay. Can I be heard now? Because I think I'm just going to turn off my video. Try and see. One minute. Okay, let me just type that out. Spaghetti bow. I think that was the concept I was trying to explain. Please let me know if you can hear me. Hello, can you hear me? Oh, great, great. Okay. Oh, hi, Grace. You're here. And Mole. Wow, there's a popular people that I know. Okay, I thought this was all newbies. All right. Uh, so I was talking about the idea of spaghetti balls, which is to say that countries can belong to, other regional bodies that are not necessarily, you know, the ones that are very proximate to them in terms of like geography, right? So you can literally just decide to have a free trade agreement with any other country, even if that country is not necessarily your immediately neighboring state. So, but the idea of spaghetti bowls is that countries oftentimes want to maximize the benefits that they can get by being in more than one union, right? So, but I'm going to give examples of that. I think um, in the next issue I'm going to be talking about. So, why has this become important? Like there has been a lot of conversation around, you know, um, integrating African economies, right? So why has it become something right now that everybody seems to agree upon that we need to do right now? Majorly is because Africa for a long time has remained marginalized in world trade, like very, very marginalized. I think as of 2018, Africa's share of exports in the world, like global exports, was just 2.5%. I didn't say Nigeria's share of exports. I didn't say, Ghana's share of exports. Africa as a whole, as much as we are, 1.2 billion people, all we can contribute to global exports, right, is 2.5%. Just to put this in context, Africa, if in terms of geographical size, right, China, India, and at least three more, big countries can fit into I think a large part of America, I think Northern or Southern America, I was reading up on that issue of size comparison, right? These countries themselves can fit into the African space. So as magnificent as the African continent is, um, the marginalization is just too evident for a number of reasons. Though one of them is self-evident, right? Because um, Africa largely hasn't taken the onus upon themselves to try and force their way into this market. Because the thing is, with the growing trend in capitalism, you don't just sit back and expect people to hand things down to you. And I think that's something that has largely been our problem in this part of the world, right? Expecting that you need to be invited and given a seat at the table of traders before you can get to do stuff. The political language or body language of our political leaders isn't necessarily very domineering or very assertive enough to want to oh, okay. So I hope that is just tolerance that has a problem. So the political will of these leaders um, isn't necessarily as assertive or progressive as you want it to be. So before we just jump into blaming everyone else for marginalizing Africa, the thing is that we've also had very shitty leaders that tend to not, push for these things to happen, that are making erratic, decisions, policy like decisions or policy making, everywhere. I'm going to talk about this when we discuss, the problems that are facing this integration. Um, but very importantly, is that the like I said, 2.5% in 2018. Then also each share of global GDP has just been 3%. So 54 countries together, our global GDP has been just around 3%. But more importantly, is that Africa's exports are usually concentrated in a few unprocessed commodities, right? So basically, just to simplify that, we're not selling the right stuff. We're just, you know, we're just there. It's just like you're going to market without necessarily doing market survey. So probably you're going to some highbrow area in Lagos. Let's say you're going to Banana Island, and then of all things to sell, you want to go and start selling sachet water, right? That's actually the kind of scenario that Africa is in, right? We are not necessarily adapting our production mechanisms to sync in line with what is in demand on the global market. We just believe, okay, we have natural resources, so Nigeria just push oil as much as we can. It doesn't matter whether the whole world is talking about climate change right now, but oil is what we're going to be selling to that kingdom from. So those are some of the problems that Africa has. We're exporting largely unprocessed commodities, right? Meaning that we're pushing out raw materials. We're not necessarily producing anything. We're just digging out raw stuff, unprocessed like that, and then sell it out. The problem with that is that you're always going to be getting shortchanged, right? Because when you look at all the work that needs to go into processing those things, like columbite, like gold, like ivory, like petroleum, crude oil, all of those things, when you look at all the process that needs to go into refining them, you're not doing those things, you just have to sell it at a ridiculously cheap price because you're not doing the work, in finessing those products themselves. So this has been largely why, even though we are doing, there's a lot of trade going on. Like Africa is supplying to a lot of people, right? Africa is like let's say, the natural resources reserve of the entire world. So it's not like people are not selling stuff, but we're selling them unprocessed. And then if the ones who are processing, we're selling very relevant stuff, on the global market. And like I said, Africa's marginalization is largely also due to its own trade policies, right? So we're not being very smart with the kind of policies that we're supposed to be making um, as a group or as a region. Okay, then let's talk about like how regional integration can then help, right? And then I'm going to take a small detour and talk about the AFCTA specifically and what it promises. Um, so how does regional integration help some of these problems that we've identified? One is that there can be substantial room for regional integration to boost intra-Africa trade. Okay, when you look at, like I said, that those 5 stages of integration I mentioned to you, the first part is being able to have a free trade area. That's largely because you want to boost trade, right? businesses are the way that communities or countries come together and try to become friends. So largely, um, right now, or as of 2018, 19, before countries started signing up, before COVID-19 happened, anyway, on the average, it is 15%. All of our trade that happens internally can only amount to 15%. So intra-Africa trade, right, is like the lowest of all major regions. All other major regions in the world are trading with each other largely. Let me just put this in context, right? Um, According to a report in I think 2019 or 2020 earlier, but all of these things were largely before COVID-19. There's not been much research happening. Everybody just focused on COVID-19 right now. So according to a report in late 2019, Kenya exports about $6 billion worth of goods to the rest of the world. Right? Kenya alone exports about 6 billion. By the way, Kenya I think is the biggest what's it called economy in the Eastern African region. So exports about $6 billion worth of goods to the rest of the world, that is Europe, America, etc. But if I ask you to guess how much Kenya is exporting to its neighbor, like it's just close by neighbor Ethiopia, what would be the guess? Right? I don't know. Probably make one or two guesses. If you were to be asked, what does Kenya export to Ethiopia? Like, what is the worth of that business or that exportation that happens? Any guesses at all? If you just type in a figure. I actually like this because it tells me whether people are typing or not. Okay, 1 million. Somebody said nothing. Grace says $1 million. Um, okay, Grace, but Grace, I don't know. You're being very okay. Well, it's not that terrible, but yeah, it is still terrible comparatively to other like I said, the trade that goes on externally. Kenya exports just $69 million worth of products to its neighboring country, Ethiopia. Right? Look at that disparity: 6 billion to 69 million. Right? I hope you know that there's a huge difference between 1 million and 1 billion. there's a lot of there's a lot of millions that are going to having a billion, and then you're sending about 6 billion worth of stuff outside. But your neighboring country doesn't necessarily get that much. So what it means is that most of our individual countries are focused on like the West, or even if not the West, particularly because I think we're selling a lot of stuff now to even countries in the East, right? But most of these countries in Africa are focused on selling stuff to outside, the outside world. How much stuff can we sell to USA? How much stuff can we sell to India or China and all of this? The problem with that kind of trade, particularly, is that it is now a race to the top instead of being a race to the bottom, right? So largely, most of these countries, and because in Africa, we usually have a similitude of things that we're producing. All most African countries just have natural resources, right? There's just a difference in the quantity that we have. Like Nigeria has, I think, a significant amount of limestone, right? And there are several other countries across Africa that has limestone as well. So if a company in China, for example, wants to buy limestone, it is now like they come to the market and then the bidding process is downward, not upward. So China says, you know what, the bidding is going to start from let's say $1 million per I don't know how they measure limestone now, but let me just assume barrel because that's what I'm used to, petroleum. So let's say $1 million per barrel, right? And then people now start bidding down. So Nigeria says, you know what, so that you can buy from me, I'm going to give you at 900,000. Then maybe Kenya says, no, I'm going to give you at 850,000. So that's the kind of process that goes on when you are focusing your trade externally. And that's one of the biggest reasons why, one of the biggest things that Africa needs to change with the AFCFTA largely, which is to increase the intra-Africa trade. So enough focus on outside countries, like outside the continent. We should focus more internally, exchange the things that we have largely, give these raw materials that we're selling to other countries that are more developmental or more manufacturing oriented, right? I think right now, Kenya, Rwanda, all of these East African countries are doing magnificently well when it comes to manufacturing stuff, right? So, as Nigeria, for example, instead of focusing all our energy in selling raw materials to the outside world, we should focus on selling those things to them. Why is that like beneficial for us? One, because when you sell to them, you are selling to an individual who is going to sell back to you at a much cheaper rate. So because there's a free trade area or agreement that is in place right now, it means if let's assume crude oil, let's assume that Kenya, this is hypothetical, I don't think Kenya refines crude oil, but let's assume Kenya refines crude oil and you sell crude oil from Nigeria to Kenya. Because there's already a free trade agreement, there's an obligation on Kenya to sell back maybe kerosene or premium motor spirit or gasoline or whatever else out of that product to sell it back to you at a much subsidized rate and also without any sort of tariffs. So all of the shortchanging we're doing by selling crude oil to the outside world and then receiving kerosene, fuel, and gas in very expensive rates, all of those, like foolery can stop or at least can significantly reduce when we're trading internally. Also, is that intra-Africa trade is more manufacturers intensive than Africa's exports to the rest of the world, right? So what this means simply is that you can't really, even though, like I said, we're selling unprocessed stuff, but that is largely because the people you are selling are people who are much more technologically driven than you. Because what what manufactured product do you want to sell to China, for instance, or to South Korea? What product do you want to give to them? They are much more technologically inclined than you. They have much more, resources to produce their those things by themselves. So you will most likely not have that market when you try to sell, those sort of things to them. But on the contrary, if you are selling internally, if you're selling to other African states, then you can afford to manufacture and sell the finished product to those countries. So the implication of this is that regional integration can then foster industrial diversification. So instead of always just harvesting cocoa and pushing it out there and buying chocolate back, we can begin to produce those chocolates internally, or like this sort of trade can force countries to want to look at ways to actually manufacture those finished goods and then try to sell to the other countries. So if you're looking for a model that improves industrialization within Africa, then like this AFCTA kind of like helps with that. Um, Other fringe benefits include building regional and economic infrastructure. So take for example what's happening between I think Nigeria and Chad, although that one has largely criticized, but there's a highway that Buhari wants to. I think no Nigeria and Nigeria Republic. There's like a road that's supposed to be built, but it's largely being paid for by Nigeria as well. I think in SADC region as well, they're also looking at um, they're also looking at those sort of things, right? Being able to have road networks that connect them so that you can do long distance haulages, right? So if Dangote is producing cement or sugar or whatever else is producing, you can have road routes that maybe cut across the entire West Africa that can allow for that trade to happen largely. Also, this can help foster food and energy security, right? Right now there's a lot of focus on food insecurity. There's global food shortage. People are dying of hunger and all of these things. Africa, on like ironically, right now still has like the most arable part of the world. Right, we're the ones that have vast, amount of untapped land resources, largely. But like I said, ironically, we're still the ones who are at the bottom of the food chain when it comes to food distribution and food security. So oh, great. I'm going to try to slow down. I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to recap on that. Regional integration can also build regional infrastructure, like I said, meaning that countries can look at collaborating in building infrastructure. This may look like things like road network, right? Like Buhari is planning in Nigeria to build a very long road network that connects Nigeria and Niger Republic, right? If you've traveled to Nigeria before from Ghana, you'll see that there's a very fine road network that happens all the way. I think it's even stretches to Cote d'Ivoire. So you can travel all the way from Cote d'Ivoire to Lagos in maybe 48 hours or thereabout, or even less than that. I think Nigeria to Ghana is largely 12 hours or thereabout. So that's because there exist those economic infrastructures that are happening, right? So this is going to be improved when you have the regional integration on a continental scale. Like I said, secondly, is that you foster food and energy security. Food and energy security. So, like I said, globally there's food shortage right now. But ironically, Africa also has the most arable land in the world, right? We're the ones that have untapped land resources. They are like acres, millions of acres of land, that isn't being used in most parts of your country, any country you are listening from. If you travel on your highways, you see, like acres of land that are just lying dormant, right? That isn't being used for either agricultural purposes, like purposes or whatever else. So when you have this sort of integration, because you want to drive up production, because that's what integration does. Everybody wants to be doing something. Nobody wants to be the consumer anymore. Everybody wants to continue to produce stuff, which is great because when we produce much more that we can use, then we can look at, like I said, having a common market and being able to export those things, externally. Uh, Also, is that you get to generate jobs for Africa's streaming youth. I think this is a no-brainer. It's something that we all can agree to. When you have a free trade area, the idea is that many people are graduating from like the bigger countries in Africa, South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya. Youth are graduating on a yearly basis, right? Thousands of youth, if not millions of youth, are graduating in these countries individually every year. Most of them with different levels of skills that the country in themselves cannot absorb. When you have a regional integration or a regional body that is strong enough and allows for free movement of labor. This includes free movement of services in themselves. So meaning that if I have a marketable good or service right here in Lagos, Nigeria, I don't necessarily need to, limit my market scope to Nigerians only. So if there's markets for me out there in Ethiopia or Djibouti, I can travel all the way and go there and have that trade and come back, knowing fully well that the entry level cost is going to be very low on me. I don't have to pay huge amounts of money on flight tickets. I don't have to pay huge amounts of money in embassies for visas and all of these things. It's going to be very easy for me to get a job, even if that job is not immediately available in Lagos or in Nigeria as a whole. So, like, jobs are being created. But aside from like transferring like labor markets, right, moving from one country to another in search of jobs, just by the existence of the free trade area, you create jobs automatically, right? This may look like even consultancy jobs. This might be maybe young people who are now helping businesses get onboarded or learn how to maximize the free trade area. Because the thing with, and I'm going to talk about that in problems because that's the last thing I'm going to talk about. The thing with the free trade area that we have right now is that it is largely unknown to people, right? All of us here, are debaters. So we can assume that at least we belong to a higher echelon of, knowledge. Like we are inclined to reading stuff. We want to analyze the news. But the actual businessman in Ojuelegba or in is it what's that market in Ghana? Is it Kotoko or whatever? Right? But the local person that needs to learn about this things don't know about them. They don't even care about them. Makola market, right? So these individuals are the ones who need to be taught these things. And being able to bridge that gap, that ignorance, right, between having a policy and transferring the policy, translating it to the local people, that in itself is also a job market that is being created in itself, right? So just by having this free trade area, you also create several levels of, opportunities that young people can leverage upon just simply by being exposed. You don't even need to be an economic graduate to do those things, right? You just need to be someone who is smart enough to say, okay, I can express myself. I can teach other people how to benefit from something, that that other countries have agreed to. So you create or generate jobs for Africa's teeming youth, and then an offshoot of that is that you can then start to alleviate poverty and promote inclusive growth, right? So alleviating poverty not just as an individual term or like country-wide, country specific, but also like as a continent generally, trying to have much more inclusive growth that includes everyone in the country. Okay, so before we then move into the AFCTA itself, because that's largely the last thing we'll talk about, just to have a clearer idea on what regional integration agreements look like or what has already existed in Africa. I'm going to be talking about regional integration agreements generally that has already existed before the AFCTA. So you have some sort of background into the problems that we're going to be discussing. Okay, I think we're still under 1 hour. Great. I think we're doing well on time. So like I already said initially, in the AU's Abuja Treaty in uh uh I think that was 2014. I think so. I'm not exactly sure of the date, right? There was a roadmap. I think it was actually early in the 1990s. I think I'm mixing up my dates. They used Abuja Treaty, it was 1990 something, 1994, thereabouts. Right? They set out a roadmap for Africa to achieve an economic and monetary union through, largely six progressive stages, which I'm going to be talking about. And the idea was to work on those things until 2028. Like I said, the problem with political sluggishness in Africa is that when they were discussing this in Abuja, 1990 something, it looked like 2028 was never going to come at all, right? But right now we are what 6 years away from 2028, right? I'm counting 2021 is done already. So between 2022 and 2028, that's like 6 years before we hit 2028, and many countries are yet to ratify the AFCFTA, right? And this was something that we kind of agreed upon that we're going to do, or something that we thought was a good thing to do as far back as 1994, right? However, the first stage is complete because the first stage of that agreement was largely to have regional economic committees or communities, right? And so now there has been about eight RECs, like regional economic committees, officially recognized by the AU, right? Like I said, I'm going to talk about those um, economic committees. Then um, there has also been integration process, right? That is the idea that because what they discussed initially was let's have regional bodies that are economic bodies themselves. The way we have ECOWAS, SADC, EAC, let's have those regional bodies. Then as time progresses, we're going to merge all of that. So it's more like we want to have the goal of AFCFTA, having a general market as Africans, but let's start from somewhere. Let's break it down and start individually. That was the idea that was set out in that Abuja Treaty. So they have done that largely. So kudos to them for at least for the regions that have managed to do that. But like when we talk about these countries, these RECs specifically, you're going to see how they have been also largely unsuccessful, or majority of them have been unsuccessful. Um, so the idea has largely been hindered by, like I said, lack of political commitment and resistance, and also like resistance to trade liberalization. This is largely because of interest, conflicting interests. Different countries have different interests. Even external bodies have conflicting interests as well, like China and all of those have their own interests in Africa that is making it difficult for Africans to agree upon these issues or these areas. Also, there has been lack of coordination at various levels and largely infrastructure deficiencies. See, to drive economic integration, you need individual developed states. Even though they say two heads are better than one, I think we can all agree that it needs to be two good heads, because two foolish heads, right, or empty heads usually are even worse than maybe one, as a matter of fact. So the idea of having a properly, integrated region or properly integrated continent needs to be bolstered by individual countries' strength in themselves. Like these individual countries need to be strong enough, even if not all the individual countries, but some of them need to be strong enough to carry other ones along. Right. So, but right now, because we're like the poverty capital of the world, it is very difficult for us to um, get the kind of benefit that we were expecting we should have gotten over the past 20 years on these issues. Okay. Um, So let's look at those regions, and then how much success they have been able to make. Like I said, there has been several regions that were formed. I think about eight of them. There's the COMESA committee of I think I'm mixing up these names, but I'm just going to stick to the ones that I know their meanings. SADC, right, the Southern African Development Committee. There's the EAC, East African Committee. There's the CENSAD. I think that's like the committee for Arab, like the Arab nations that are in Africa themselves. Then there's ECOWAS, which all of us belong to. Then there's one for um, Central African States, Economic Committee for Central African States, ECAS, ECCAS. So there's largely about eight of them. But the problem is that uh, these when assessed on a number of issues, because these regions needed to be tested on like very key indices, like 5 of them. One is trade integration. So how much are they trading amongst each other? It's not just enough to have a name and call it ECOWAS and say, we're doing business, right? But how much are we able to trade amongst each other? Then regional infrastructure. What are the infrastructures that have been put in place to ensure that we are like improving those relationships that we're trying to create? Then productive integration, then free movement of people, and as well as a financial and macroeconomic integration. So amongst all of these, indices, some of them have become better. Like some economic regions in Africa have become better than others, while they are losing on the other one. Let me give an instance. ECOWAS, for example, is ranking highest when it comes to free movement of people. Like I said, those of you who have traveled for the big tournaments across between Nigeria and Ghana would attest that you don't need a visa to go to Ghana. So you have to pass Benin Republic, Togo, and Ghana without any visas as well. So when it comes to free movement, I think that's the one singular thing we are going to praise ECOWAS for. They have managed to successfully achieve that one. But bear in mind also that if you have had that experience, you will know that not having to go for visas is just one aspect of free movement. There's also a lot of challenges going on the borders, right? Largely because of over or high-handed customs officers or other sort of law enforcement officers that exist along the road. So even if you're not being charged for visas, you have to pay for they definitely always come up with names for it, right? When I was in Cameroon, for instance, um the that was in 2017. I was told that because my passport is a virgin passport, right, I needed to pay 25,000 CFAs just to enter. Like, I don't need a visa, I didn't need a visa, but the immigration person wouldn't sign my passport until I paid 25,000 CFA. Now, 25,000 CFA, I think that was even as much as the transport I paid already because I went through the sea. So it's like asking me to pay the exact cost of my travel just to get my passport stamped. So it's not just enough to say we don't have visa restrictions anymore or visa obligations. It's also we need to also look at how much what's the body language of the people who are placing on our borders, and this things flow from the top. How much charge are we giving to them? Are we seeing a Nigerian that moves into Ghana as a member of ECOWAS? Because, like I said, as political leaders, we all understand that okay, ECOWAS is in place. But as individuals, like if I go to Ghana and I want to buy something in Makola market, or if Joyce comes to Aswani market, right, and wants to buy something, do the local traders in those areas, do they see each other? Do they see this external person as a member, like one community? Like, do I see myself as a West African in Ghana, or do Ghanaian traders see me as a West African, or do they still see me as a Nigerian? So some of these, cultural differences that exist still make it very difficult for the kind of integration we always have wanted to be achieved. Because when you go to Ghana, you are still being called a Nigerian, even though you have ECOWAS that has been existing for years, right? But you are still being treated as a Nigerian, meaning that there's some sort of, segregation that is going on right there. Then it doesn't work. I think Nigerians were the first corporates when there was the entire Ghana must go thing, right? So, like, all of us still at the local level, at the grassroots level, there's almost no knowledge about some of these things that have been put in place as far back as 1994, right? So those are some of the problems that are being faced right now. When it comes to things like trade, internal trade, the EAC is leading, right? That is trade between member countries of the member states rather of this economic region. The East African region is leading in that one. If you've been to East Africa, for example, you will notice that beyond just being able to have free visas and trade, what they're also trying to do is to have a cultural sort of cultural integration. So now there's like a I don't know if they passed it, but there's a bill for them to use or identify Swahili, right, as the central language of all East Africans, East Africans. What am I saying? Right, of all Easterners. So I think that was what was in my mind. So the idea is that if if you if you travel from Tanzania to Kenya, for example, or to Uganda, there shouldn't be cultural backgrounds that make it difficult for you to integrate. If everyone speaks Swahili, for example, then yes. So nobody really, because we're all black, right? In color. I'm not sure that we have different facial makeup between a Ghanaian and a Nigerian, where maybe Ghanaians are darker very significantly. But yeah, they're also very dark in Nigeria. So you can't always just segregate people based upon how they look. But you see, the moment people open their mouth and speak the language or cannot speak the language, then there's a problem. That's, segregation starts happening. So that's something that East Africa is trying to do right now, trying to inculcate regional integration beyond trade, but also into cultures, right? Having a central language that allows everybody to communicate amongst each other. So those are just some of the things. I don't want to go very deep into them, but like I said, the degree of integration that has been achieved by all these regional economic regions vary widely on those 5 dimensions, right? Like I said, ECOWAS is leading on movement of people, while EAC is leading on internal trade and all of this. So there has not been any region that we can say is clearly ahead because they have achieved everything, all of those 5 indices. So some regions are doing better in movement of people, some are doing better in movement of goods and services, some are doing better with you know what's it called, productive integration, while some are doing better with macroeconomic integration. So it just all jumbled up. So the successes that we have achieved is just, I don't know, it's just there. We have achieved them on paper, but largely unsuccessful. Yeah, I'll take questions as soon as I'm done. I should finish by 8:30. Yeah, then I'll leave the last 30 minutes for questions. Okay, so like I said, there has been some progress, like Africa making gradual progress towards the free movement of persons. But it needs to then be taken away from just the regions in themselves. So, like I said, it is easy for me to travel now from Nigeria to Ghana. I've done that a couple of times. But when I needed to go to Tanzania for PhD in 2018, in fact, I almost didn't make that trip because even though on the website you are supposed to, in fact, it's okay for you to get a visa on arrival when you get to Tanzania as a Nigerian, but somewhere along the line, for reasons that are obvious, right, there was a change. So after I applied in Abuja, I had to wait for over a month. In fact, I didn't get it, to be very honest. My host, the people who were convening fields then, have to get a covering letter for me from the immigration office in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and send it to me in Nigeria to print it out, then carry it all the way from Nigeria so that everywhere I'm asked, where's your visa? I present a paper from the whatever head of um, immigration in Tanzania and say, I have a waiver. So I didn't actually get a visa, even though I waited for I started that process sometime in October, but even until December when the tournament was happening, I couldn't still get that visa. So beyond just what we're doing as sub-regions like ECOWAS, for example, on the continent, it's still very, very difficult, very, very difficult to have easy travel. Like travel is still very complicated on the continent. And those are things that, this AFCTA seeks to want to get. Like I said, however, only 22 countries have signed the protocol and or rather have ratified it. Less than 30 have ratified it. But right now, about something of them have signed it. Okay, so I'm just going to skip a number of things and then um, go straight into the promises of the AFCT, and then we'll discuss the problems and round up because I actually have to get to dinner. Okay, um, the AFCTA or AFCFTA, Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, largely promises 3 things, right? The document is massive, but the summary of it is just in 3 folds. One is a consolidated market size, right? Like I already explained, we want to increase our market size. Instead of having a market size of 200 million citizens as Nigeria, we can now have a market size of 1.2 billion people as Africa, right? Instead of having a GDP that is 143 out of 193 as Rwanda, we can now have a GDP that is number 8 in the world. So that is simply what like the AFD wants to achieve, right? So having a collective market that makes it makes you very competitive on the global scene, makes you huge and makes you feared or respected, whatever is your preference, but makes you very respected on the global scene in itself. But like I said, having 1.2 billion potential customers is huge because then you are able to sway, production, not just in terms of imports, right? Not just by sitting down and importing techno phones from China, but you can then command movement of companies into your own areas. So you can, if you say, for example, we're going to prohibit the importation of, um, you know, um, Chinese produced phones, except you move your companies here so that you can produce more work for us. They're going to listen because now, if you say it as uh, Ghana, I don't know, Ghana is less than 100 million, I guess. If you say that as Ghana, okay, fine. If you don't want to buy, no problem. We'll sell it to Nigeria. Nigerians will still smuggle it to Ghana and stuff like that. But when you make that sort of demand as the African region and you have 1.2 billion potential customers that they get to do that from, they can't say no to those sort of things. And that's like, what the the sheer size of your market capitalization can look like. Secondly, is free movement. Okay. Like I said, currently travel is very hard across Africa. Um, so it is very difficult for people to sell their talents across the continent. So no matter how many talented lawyers or doctors or whatever that you are getting, you would have that you are producing in Nigeria, you would have more doctors going from Nigeria all the way to Canada than you would have doctors going from Nigeria to South Africa, which is weird, right? But that's the situation of things that we'll find ourselves in. So the FCTA promises to improve free movement or to actually achieve free movement, thereby making it easier for people to sell their talent on the continent, not necessarily just taking it outside. Because I think as a continent, we're suffering from collective brain drain, right? So all of our finest minds are going to the developed world, not necessarily because they would otherwise want to. Because to be very honest, I think that if you consider some of the very harsh cultural realities of living in the UK or living in the US, things like police brutality, things like racism and all of those things. I think if given the option, you would have a significant number of Africans, or let's say Nigerians specifically now, maybe Nigerian doctors or nurses, registered nurses, choosing to fly their trade somewhere in Rwanda, which is like a very developed country right now, like relatively developed, not that they're still developing anyway, but I mean, like in terms of infrastructural development, they are miles ahead of a lot of us now in Africa. So I think if given the opportunity, a lot more people would choose to move themselves from Nigeria to Rwanda, and know that you still have some significant amount of home feeling, right? You are still seeing black people around you. You are not, exposed to, racial discrimination and crimes and all of those things, and you don't have to, suffer maybe a very huge change in weather differences. So all of those other considerations will begin to matter to people if there was the alternative market. But now nobody cares, even though you live in Nigeria where the temperature today was as high as 27 degrees. Even though you live in Nigeria where it is perpetually hot, right, in this part of the year, people are willing to move to Russia that has minus, like negative temperature readings all year round. So people are willing to move there and try to adapt their bodies to that cold instead of moving to any other African country. So when you have free movement, those are kind of the things that you get to fix, in the status quo. Lastly, is increased trade between African countries. Like I said, I've already explained how much Kenya exports outside, 6 billion, and then 69 million for Ethiopia. So this is largely because there are high trade taxes or tariffs, right? Something that the AfCFTA wants to downsize by around 90%. So you could see that trade only in the East African region, for example, can rise to as much as 1 billion USD of worth of goods and services if you successfully implement like trade integration amongst like those regions. So this is just the East African region. Look at how much can be done on the continent as well if you increase trade that's happening internally. Like I said, the problem with this though is that our individual fiscal policies are a lot, and most of them are very ignorant policies. I'm going to give you an example with my home country, Nigeria. Nigeria, for example, like I told you, is trying to tax its way out of poverty. Before COVID-19 hit, Nigeria just woke up one day in 2019 and decided to move the tariff on medical equipment. Now, bear in mind that Nigeria does not produce medical equipment, but Nigeria decided to move the tariff from 10% to 70%. That's how much they increase the tariff on like medical equipment. Same thing they did with syringes, right? The whole idea is simple. So maybe somebody gives a talk in the maybe to the president or to the minister of finance and says, you know what, we have plastic manufacturing companies. We can produce our own syringes. Let's increase the tariff of syringes, and then that's all. Policies are just passed. Boom. No proper research, no proper fallback mechanism, no proper fail-safe plan. We just implement it. They increase the tariff of syringes from 5% to 70%. That's how much tax you have to pay for bringing in syringes and other medical equipment. So the erratic nature of these policies, the arbitrary nature is just very disgusting to witness, right? And that has been a major problem with these countries themselves. So people just wake up and make policies. Like even though we have ECOWAS that has existed for a while, it didn't stop Nigeria from closing the border sometime in 2019, right? It didn't stop before COVID-19 happened. Nigeria's borders were already closed, and Benin Republic were begging up and down. Their tomatoes were getting spoiled because Benin Republic farmers usually, produce tomatoes and then sold it, cross the borders into Lagos to sell it in baskets. But that was bad. Like there were news reports of the president, Benin Republic president, coming on air to say our tomatoes are spoiling. Like that was the headline. Our tomatoes are getting bad. You can't sell it. So because ECOWAS already existed and gave this small country, Benin Republic, a hope or of a lifeline. So they have believed that we can produce much more tomatoes than we need individually, right? So they produce all of that, and now you just shut down your borders overnight, and then they can't sell it anymore. So what are they supposed to do with all of those tomatoes? Probably make ketchup and send to Ghana. But yeah, it was a very hard time for Benin Republic back then. So the arbitrary nature of our policy making processes in this part of the world makes it very difficult for the AFCA to materialize itself. So you will need to first and foremost get all the leaders, all of them, not a single one needs to get out. Get all of them, on board, not just by signing or ratifying. But I think those things are easy. Finance minister will just tell the president, okay, this is good. We have created a committee. In fact, in Nigeria, they created two committees. After the first committee says, let's ratify. Because if you follow the news back then, Nigeria was one of the last countries to sign or to ratify the bid, or not bid now. I'm talking like this person, but to ratify the agreement, like the free trade agreement. That was largely because we kept on stalling and stalling and stalling. There was a committee that took months to research. They went across all the 36 states and the FCT to do town hall meetings and engage stakeholders and all of those things. After all of that, their report was, let's sign it and ratify it. They gave that to the president. What the president did was to set up another committee, and all of that process started again. So the body language of leadership is very poor. I think it's my second challenge. The second challenge is leadership and governance, right? There's a sluggish body language by government leaders, as policy issues are largely driven by big business interests. Because sometimes it's not just the ignorance of your political leaders, but it's also the fact that their hands are tied down by economic capitalists, right? So the big businesses in these countries are the ones who fund campaigns for these political leaders, right? They're the ones whose monies get used to they use for bailout. When COVID-19 hit, it was companies, banks that were giving out 200 million naira, to the federal government to try and create aid and all of those things. So all of those things is aimed at tying the mouths of the policymakers or tying their interests. So before you get any significant policy made in most countries, you need to hear from the manufacturers, right? Dangote needs to whisper to your ears what needs to happen. Dan Tata needs to whisper to your ears what needs to happen. So that is the biggest problem that happens, right? Or that exists within the African space. The leadership is poor, so much so that their hands are being, not just because they are ignorant, like I said, which is a very major reason, but secondly, because their hands are being tied by big business interests. Capitalism, like, has done a lot to us more than you can, admit. So the third problem is knowledge and awareness. I think I hinted on this already. There needs to be a translation from policy making to policy implementation, right? Because when you're looking at a free trade area, it's not like there's going to be some magic that's going to happen and the president will be the one selling the goods by themselves on the market. You still need to engage, that farmer in the village to tell them that there are options now for them to produce their cocoa and export, meaning that they need to improve, their production over time. So the knowledge and awareness is not there right now. You need to drastically go into the streets, inform people. It's not the same way we do population census or the same way we do election, campaigns. We need to campaign literally for AFCTA. People on the ground who don't have access to internet as much as you and I do. People who don't have access to cable television as much as you and I do. Those guys need to know like what these promises of AFCFTA hold for them, and that is like a huge um, 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 barrier that might be preventing us from getting to this promised land. Next is the training for small businesses and entrepreneurs, right? So, like I said, beyond just informing them that this happens, most of them need to be trained, right? Most of them need to learn how to navigate this international space because hey, it's not just magic. You can't just wake up anyway simply because there's been a free trade agreement. You don't just wake up and carry your goods on your head and cross border and go to other places. So probably there's definitely going to be some sort of paperwork that needs to be done. People need to know how to buy into these spaces themselves. So those trainings need to be done, and you cannot leave it only to big businesses because those guys are already benefiting, right? Those guys are already rich. If you're looking to lift us out of poverty, then you need to focus on the small business guys, right? So those are the people that you need to be training at the end of the day. So Dangote, for example, even before you had a free trade agreement, Dangote is already exporting sugar and pasta across Africa and even beyond. So that is not those are not the people that need to know these things because when they were doing the town hall meetings in Nigeria, those are the kind of people they were inviting. They were inviting business owners who had maybe factories in Aba or who had factories in Lagos or all of this. Those people already have the one technical know-how. Two, they already are informed of these things. Small businesses are the ones that are left out. Entrepreneurs are the ones that are left out, and need to be trained on this stuff. Next is lack of infrastructure, right? Again, if you are training people, it means you are training them to use the available infrastructure. I think the biggest infrastructural challenge we have in Africa, which all of us can attest to, whichever country you are in, is electricity, right? Because I said initially that when you have the AFCFTA, you tend to drive up industrialization. So people want to have produce more stuff. But the biggest impediment to industrialization is lack of electricity. You can't be doing dumsor. I think that's what you guys call it in Ghana, and then trying to produce chocolate out of your cocoa, right? You're going to have expensive chocolate. Nobody wants to buy. You can't be doing NEPA challenges, right? Or ESCOM in Southern Africa. You can't be having all of those challenges and then trying to produce magnificent toys or whatever other product that you want to put out there. So these are the reasons why instead of fixing the infrastructure, we're just happy to mine the crude oil and sell it out, or mine the cocoa and sell it out, right? Because we don't have the infrastructure to actually invest in the production of those things. So that again is a big challenge. Next is, I think I've talked about five now. So six is China, right? This might be funny, but like I actually thought about it because I was literally doing this prep, like I was prepping for debate. China is a major impediment to Africa's, free trade, like flourishing, Africa's free trade agreement flourishing, right? Why is that? There's a lot of investments that China has made in the African space that is just very difficult for us to pick them out, right? So it's not enough for you to just sign paper. Now you have signed paper that you're going to be doing businesses more with Ghana and with South Africa. But what happens to the business that China has already given you, right? One is that you are tied to them because of some of the ridiculous things that your presidents are signing. I think in Nigeria in 2020 or 2019, I can't remember, there was an uproar. People actually had, a win of some sort of like ridiculous clause that was in an agreement between Nigerian government and a Chinese company. They had literally said they were going to, like, if Nigeria couldn't pay back the loan that they were using to invest in this particular infrastructure, that they were going to take over a percentage of Nigeria's sovereignty. Like, they didn't mince words. That was the language on the document, sovereignty, right? So when you have sold your sovereignty or your freedom or your humanity to another country, to China specifically, what are you going to do? Because you can't be trading with China as significantly as you are doing right now and also trading with other African countries. That's not possible, except you want to start producing more stuff they're not producing now. Nigeria, for example, is producing oil as our main stuff, right? Maybe second to that would be agricultural products. But because most of those businesses or most of those trades themselves happen with China, the infrastructure stuff that we import, the technological products that we import is largely from China. So are you going to tell China to stop importing those things so that you can buy it from Ghana or buy it from Tanzania? What are you going to do exactly when you have all of those processes? So I think China is a big problem, but by extension, also it doesn't seem like I'm anti-Chinese, right? Because I don't know where they're going to pose it. So certain people say I'm anti-Semitic. By extension, I think the entire developed world is actually, the relationship we have with the developed world is actually going to be an impediment to the AFCFTA, right? So beyond China, there are also other countries that have, significant interest. US is there, UK is there, right? Those people have significant interest in either what we are producing in Africa or what they are producing that they can give to us. Nobody wants to lose that market. Like there was a report sometime, I think again in 2019, 2020, when not Elon Musk now, um, Apple, right? Apple was called out for, the inhumane treatment of people who were digging or mining raw materials for them in Congo that they used to make the Apple product. So when you start doing the AFCFTA, it means, for example, that the amount of raw materials you are giving to Apple, for example, to produce their product is going to reduce because now you are encouraging other countries in Africa to begin to use those same raw materials for their own production. So it can range from lead to columbite to whatever other natural resources or mineral resources that exist. So what are you going to do with all of those other countries that have a lot of stake with them? I don't think these issues are being discussed enough, on the in some of the conversations that have followed through over the years. Um, Next is, I think that's number 7, our cultures, right? Conservative cultures, particularly misogynistic practices. I think that this training will not be complete if we don't talk about the fact that most of our African indigenous cultures are ones that restrict women's involvement in economically stimulating processes, right? So because there's a lot of things we are saying women cannot do, it means we are limiting the workforce, right? We're limiting our economic stimulation by as much as 50%. I think it's significant. This is very, very huge. So either these are, religiously inclined cultures that prevent women from maybe, being involved in some kind of trade or some kind of, industry, or it is just our own, very, let me not call them regressive, right, out of disrespect, but our own very conservative, cultures that we have. So the point is that we need to deal with those things, right? Like I said, particularly those misogynistic practices that restrict women's involvement in economically stimulating processes, we need to deal with them. If you are going to have a full maximization of a free trade area, then it means that your entire workforce needs to be deployed to achieving that, because you need to achieve this in a very quick period, a high period of time, a quick period of time actually. I think there was something that I came across about how a how this when they signed the AFCFTA in 2000 or when they agreed upon in 2017, there was a 5 year span. That's the question in the document. Oh, that we're going to try to achieve most of these things in 5 years. 5 years in 2000 and what? 2022, right? 2022 is next year, and most countries have not even started implementing the agreement in itself. But when we agreed this in 2017, we thought 2022 was going to come going to be so far that before we get to that point, we would have achieved a lot of things, but we're not achieved that right now. So for you to scale that time that you've set for yourself, you can't afford to lose out on 50% of your population. You need to actually carry along women specifically, and also like young people generally. Um, or the other concern that I have about the AFCFTA is the global climate change concerns that already exist right now. Okay. Um, Currently, Africa emits about 2 to 3% of global greenhouse gases. But experts suggest that Africa is still the continent that's going to suffer the most from climate change if nothing is done about it. So see the irony once more. We're the ones that are emitting the lowest, but we're the ones that suffer the most as a result of the emissions from other countries. So it means that there's a moral dilemma right now for these African countries. Are we going to develop, rapidly by traditional means of industrialization, right? Which means cutting down trees, burning coal, burning fossil fuels, and all of this. Are we going to develop like that? That's the good old way, because that's how most of these your developed countries got where they are. That's why they don't have arable land right now. That's why they don't have clean, fresh air, right? Are we going to develop that way because it's a very fast way to develop, or are we going to go through the slow and steady process of learning cleaner ways of development? I think that's a big moral question that needs to be, talked about. And again, in the discussions around AFCFTA, there isn't necessarily significant conversations going on about that. Everybody's just saying, we're going to improve industrialization. But nobody's talking about how we're going to improve that industrialization. If you're going to do that by burning fossil fuels, it means the entire world is going to come against you, right? Now, I think the world just rose from the COP26 meeting, which was the climate change meeting in itself. And then there's this consensus that we need to cut down on our use of coal, right? So the world is already moving away from fossil fuels. But Africa is still there where we're now saying, we have signed free trade. Let's now industrialize. And I think it means let's now industrialize through fossil fuels because that's what we have anyway, at least Nigeria. If I'm speaking for Nigeria and some other in African countries, that's what we have. All we have is mining. Like we have a lot of potential in what we can mine, whether it's coal or gold or whatever. And mining and all of those processes have significant impact on the environment. So are we going to be well, let's go with the world. We're moving to greener processes, or are we going to say, screw the world, let's do things that favor us the way it's going to favor us, and let's get, industrialized? That question is a huge question that needs to be answered. And the last, but perhaps definitely not the least challenge, is insecurity and corruption. Right? I think I already talked about this already. There's a lot of obstructive law enforcement agents that are along the borders, right? Be it between Nigeria and Benin Republic, or Benin Republic and Togo, or Togo and Aflao border between Ghana and Togo. Like every of those, any border you cross, like at least the ones I've been to, there's always some shady business going on there. Like always, always. There's somebody who wants you to grease their palms, right? There's someone who wants you to, or someone who is willing to look the other way, even if you're carrying something that shouldn't be imported into the other country, if you are willing to pay the right amount. So the amount of corruption that is happening on the borders, and I'm not even sure. Well, people will say the ones that happen at the top is larger, but it's a lot. Particularly because we're talking about the free trade area, which definitely has to go through the border. Because having free movement doesn't mean we're going to stop having border patrols. It doesn't mean we're going to stop having immigration. They're still going to be there. But are they really going to be implementing the things that we have discussed in the AFCFTA, or are they just going to be implementing what suits their agenda, their individual agenda, as a matter of fact? So I think that's a big problem. Then of course insecurity. It doesn't matter how many papers we sign. If you still have Boko Haram in northern Nigeria, nobody's going to want to export anything to that place because there are chances that your truck can be thwarted along the road and be seized, right? Or like maybe hoodlums, or what they call them now, bandits or whatever that sort of names that we're giving them that are not terrorists. They can easily just kill or maim your traders. Or even if you are looking at exporting your services or your talent, you don't want to go to a place like Southern Africa during 2019 when there was xenophobic attacks, right? So even if you are looking at moving to that place, that take up a lecturing job or whatever, you are thinking twice about that because of the xenophobia, right? Same thing happened in Ghana when Ghanaians like burned down, I think, a section of the market where Nigerian traders particularly were in. Same thing happened in Nigeria when there was Ghana must go and there was the return attack on South Africa. So like whether from the south to the north to the east to the west, there's just a lot of insecurity that's going on, right? Ethiopia that we were all praising. I think the Ethiopian president just a year or 2 years ago won a Nobel Peace Prize. And now look at Ethiopia. A lot of violence going on there. Like the state is literally a failed state, right? And we're just waiting for it to be named a failed state, right? That violence, if care is not taken, can spill over to Kenya or other neighboring states that exist. So insecurity, again, is a major issue. And I'm not sure there's any part of the AFCTA that talks about having a global, a continental approach to solving security challenges, right? So even if we have that sort of agreement, are we going to leave our own? Like, Is it Nigeria going to leave Boko Haram and say, let's go and help Ethiopia regain stability, or Ghana is going to leave, their own individual problem, or maybe let's say tribal clashes and all of this, and say let's go and start helping South Africa. So those insecurity challenges are huge, and again, I very significant impediment to the actualization of the benefits of the free trade agreement. Yep. So I think I'm right on time on my schedule. Um, Thank you very much for listening or coming to my TED talk. I'll take questions now if there are any. Yep. Thank you very much. I'm just scrolling to see if there are questions. There are no hands up. I think somebody was asking for questions to open up. Joyce, do you have a question?
Hello, can you
You're breaking up a bit.
hear me?
No, we can't hear you. I'm assuming that's what you're asking. We can't hear you. Okay, she has left. Probably going to join in a bit. Does anyone else have a question?
Yeah, Izzy, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted to ask, um, like, if the free trade agreement exists between countries, would it be possible for a country to opt out, like, at any time? Like, for instance, if the free trade agreement actually existed, would Nigeria have been able to, like, order the closure of borders, or would they just, like, not care about the agreement anymore at that point?
Okay, so like I said, if there's a free trade agreement in place, yeah, like on paper, in principle, Nigeria shouldn't be able to do that. But in practice, Nigeria does that already because there's already some sort of agreement with ECOWAS, like to allow for the free movement of goods and services. But Nigeria still closed our borders in 2019. So what's to say that if we have the free trade agreement in Africa, that Nigeria will not still not do that? So that's why I said the political will is a problem, right? So leaders are still going to be as arbitrary in their decision making, right? Or they're still going to exercise their impunity. There's a lot of political impunity in this part of the world. Anybody who is commissioner or minister, like feels like God, and they can wake up and do anything at any point. So, like even though there was ECOWAS, not ECOWAS did nothing. Like apart from just, would I say literally beg? They were almost like they were begging Nigeria to open borders, which shouldn't be the case, right? There needs to be some sort of um, hardcore punitive measures for countries that violate it. It's okay if you don't want to sign it, which is it's not compulsory. Like I said, 52 out of 55 countries have signed it. The other three that didn't sign it, nobody is killing them right now, right? So it's okay if you don't want to sign it. Again, it is okay to pull out. I think in every regional trade agreement, there's always the pull out option, right? You can always terminate that clause out of this. So it's either you belong or you don't belong. Even Britain was able to pull out of the economic union as advanced as it is, the European Union as advanced as it is, not just a free trade area, it's an economic union, but Britain was able to pull out of it. Of course, there are processes, right? But they went through the processes and Brexit happened. So yes, you can pull out of any free trade agreement, but you shouldn't be able to violate the free trade agreement in itself when you are still a signed member of the treaty. You shouldn't be able to violate that. So Nigeria should not be able to close our borders, when you're still a member of that particular treaty. But yeah, it happens. It's a problem. Another question? I can see you are unmuted. Dolores. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but you can't hear anything. Okay. Um, Anyone else? Okay, so I can either assume that I've been a fantastic lecturer and everybody understands. I've been a terrible one and nobody understands it. You can't ask questions.
Okay, I don't think anybody else has any question. So, yeah, thanks very much, Eze, for spending almost 2 hours of your time with us. It's been an interesting session. I had to be rotating throughout the different sessions, but the portions I got were very interesting for me. Thanks a lot, and I hope we've all learned something. Um, that brings us to the end of this evening's session.
I think there's a question, if I could just address it.
Tomorrow. Okay, sure.
Yeah. So Philip says if I could talk about political union. So like I said, political union is like the most complicated part of a regional integration agreement. What it simply means is that you have a union of countries that are bound by one government. That's really what it means. Just like having United States of Africa. I think yes, I think USA, United States of America, is an example of political union, although they are now being seen as a country in itself, but that's a political union. So if you have United States of Africa, for example, and we have a central government, that would be a political union. But like I said, you can't jump to that process without you can't jump the stairs. You need to first of all have a free trade agreement, right? You need to have customs like union, you need to have common markets, you need to have an economic union. All of those things need to consolidate each other before you are able to have a political union. But that's literally what political union means. It just means two or more countries coming together and agreeing to be bound by the same political, ideologies and policies. So you just have a central government. So you're going to have a parliament, African parliament, right? Not the kind of ones we have now. The ones we have now are just advisory to AU, which is not the political union in itself. So you're going to have the African parliament. Countries are going to send parliamentarians to those places. You're going to have a president or whatever it is called, primary, whatever you choose to call it. But the idea is that there's going to be a United States of all of those countries. If it is West Africa that wants to do it, it's going to be United States of West African countries, right? Or ECOWAS would not just be economic community, it's going to be a political committee, right? It's going to be a country of sorts, a country that has other countries. So some countries now are going to operate as states, to the main country itself, and they're going to be bound by the rules, policies, and ideologies of the central government itself. Um, with what you have said so far, I think it is very good so far. Actually, when I was like going through my notes, I was wondering if I should talk about challenges before the prospects. Um, I think to be honest, I don't want to weigh in my own personal opinion, but I think you are forcing me to do that. If you ask me, I'm going to agree with you. I think most of the balls right now is just going to die down, and there's going to not be the kind of change. I think in the long run, changes will happen. We're going to see the Africa we desire, but the timelines they are putting is just shitty, right? 2028 is 6 years from now. Since we signed the deal, there hasn't been anything that happened. What is the chance or possibility that a lot is going to happen in 6 years' time? 2022 is next year, which is when a lot of we should have been reviewing because that's what is document. By 2022, we'll look at how much progress we have made. We have made no progress at all since 2017. So I think that we are sluggish, but we're not stagnant, right? Because at least we've had regional bodies, like I said. ECOWAS has worked significantly in terms of free movement of people. The EAC is leading all of us right now in East Africa. They're showing us the way, right? SADC region is also trying to compete a lot on some of those indices. So because we're getting it right, even though we're shaky on the individual regions, it means that we can hope to integrate all of those benefits, all of those successes, and try to consolidate them into one mega, gigantic body. Um, as identified now that China being a great model and all the factors responsible, how, as a proportion, can you show that it can still work? And also the issue about the infiltration of illegal goods. Okay, that's like one about it. Okay. So like I said, they these challenges in themselves are not insurmountable. That's the first thing I need to see. There are a lot, but they're not insurmountable. So let me give an instance, right? I don't think that you cannot, you know, in the next 1 year, aggressively educate your populace. If we say let's educate people right now about the AFCFTA and how businesses can get into it, and we say let's digitally onboard all of these businesses, I think those can be achieved in 1 year, right? Political campaigns get to the nooks and crannies of everywhere. We have we have polling units in places that you don't even have roads that can access them. We send people there because we want them to vote. If we just put that amount of energy into, like driving this sort of awareness, we're also going to be able to achieve that. The problem then lies with the leadership, right? When you have a consensus, like not just not just lip service, when you have actual body language that is positive from the leaders, then it's easy to surmount some of these challenges, right? Because when you have this education going on, then you don't even have to wait so long for you to have the kind of infrastructure you want, right? You can have a lot of investment coming into the infrastructure. And bear in mind that the China example, that I gave, can also be used as a positive. Okay, so I think the simple rebuttal to that issue is that instead of being tied to China or being debted to China as an individual country right now, we can deal with China as a continent. So meaning that the same kind of investment Nigeria gets from China or Rwanda gets from China, Africa can get that. So let's say, for instance, we need a significant amount of investment in our electricity infrastructure. You can then have China bankroll all of that. And it's easy for you to pay back, either because you are saying, oh, you know what, China, we're going to give you some sort of leeway for the next 5 years to import stuff for free, or we're going to, pay you back, what's it called now? Uh, I've forgotten the name that is called, but we're going to pay you back bit by bit, right? So those things can be done. And the issue with that is because when you have a union that is made up of all 54 states or 55, I don't know, of in Africa, when you have that union, it is very difficult for you to sign very, shitty agreements. You can't sign that China will take away 10% or 5% of Africa's sovereignty. Nobody's going to agree to sign that kind of thing because the consultation process is going to be much more rigorous. So the whole China thing or Western, power thing can play into our own benefit. Because to be honest, we can't achieve the kind of industrialization that we want to achieve in the next 10 years without some sort of significant help externally, right? So you need those investments to come in. You can allow them for a while. This is entirely what we do as a country anyway. If as a country you want to improve your roads or your telecommunication system, you allow for people like MTN. That's what Nigeria did. Allow for MTN to come in, even though they're not from your origin. Allow them, give them some sort of leeway, maybe a couple of years tax free and all of those things, just so that they can establish themselves and build the kind of economy that you want. So you can allow for investment from China. I'm not saying China is, all the devil in themselves, but yeah, you can just make it you can balance the negotiation. Right now, China has a huge hold on African countries, right? But when you have Africa together dealing with China, then that is a much more balanced. After it's not balanced, the balance is now still tilted towards Africa. Um, yeah, the issue of infiltration of illegal goods. Again, that's the problem of, I don't know, that's the problem of corruption. I think we just talk about corruption a lot and never really came to talk about how to solve it. For me personally, I think corruption is just a term that we have, the political elites have wounded up to confuse us. I think there are elements of corruption that you can focus on individually. So bribery, for example, when you are hard on bribery, maybe by increasing the punishment for them, by making it easier for people to report bribery scenarios, right? When you are hard on those things, I don't think that those other countries that have been able to eliminate or reduce bribery have, they have two heads. When you eliminate all of those things, then you can have a much more saner system. But very importantly too is to notice that there are some sort of ingrained behaviors that you need to institutionalize. Let me give you an instance. The same sort of things that we call bribery during elections here is what the Western world calls lobbying. And it's just a change of term because to be honest, if you're going to lobby for support, it simply means you are gathering people in one place, buy them fast food dinners, probably give them, maybe they will not give checks, but some sort of conditions get to happen. But I also actually think that checks do change hands when those lobbying meetings go on, right? So because you cannot always eliminate the idea of people wanting money or some sort of benefit, everybody will have personal interest. If I'm going to sign this, what is in it for me? So that's what lobbying is all about. Even in the United Nations, they take breakout sessions to go and lobby with other countries. We are simply telling other countries, if you do this, if you agree to this, this is what you are going to benefit from. Here we call it bribery and we criminalize it. So some of these things we can institutionalize, right? But the ones that are very dastardly, like taking money from poor traders along the borders, you can criminalize all of those shit, right? And try to like make sure that the ability for people to report them is high, and you can make scapegoats of people. I think when there's a high amount of arrest and prosecution in the over 1 year across borders, I think it is simple for people to just know that the economy is no longer balanced. You can't sacrifice or sacrifice maybe 10 years or 20 years in prison simply because of what $5 you want to collect on a flower border. What can be the sanctions? I think when I start working in Africa, I can answer this question. How can we show that internal conflicts politically in nations affects AFCFTA? Okay, like I said, right? One of the biggest delays that we had was countries getting on board to sign it. Even Nigeria, as beneficial as the AFCTA is going to be to Nigeria, Nigeria was, I think, 40 something in the list of countries that signed it eventually. This is because we are looking at our own personal interest. And to be honest, you can't always have your cake and eat it, right? Every country is going to want to give up some things. Small countries are going to benefit because now we're taking as a bigger block. Big countries are going to maybe lose out a little bit because now you don't have all of as a big country that has a market of 200 million people. There's a lot of money in the import taxes that you put, right? All of those money we take on the borders is important for us. So when you take that away, Nigeria will be losing significantly. But a country like Djibouti, that is a very tiny island, right, necessarily would not suffer by taking away tariffs. In fact, they are benefiting because anything they have to export now, they are exporting it and not paying tariffs on it. So because of those differences of interest, there's conflicting interest. So big nations are not very eager to sign this and get into it holistically. Everybody's looking at how do we make it benefit us in the long run. But I think the trade-off there is if you're losing out on tariffs because you're not getting tariffs, you are gaining on exports because it means you also have a bigger market that can produce stuff like production market, export market, right? So even though you're losing out on income tariffs or import tariffs, you're also benefiting because you're pushing stuff out there. Your citizens are benefiting because those your 200 million people can now travel across Africa free of charge and get their services hired. So I think countries need to look at it as a give and take. You can't have everything. So if you're losing one, you're gaining the other one. And I don't think there's any country that's going to be losing all at the time, just as there's no country that's going to be benefiting all at the same time. So yeah, like sanctions, like I said again, on the question of sanctions, I don't know. I think in the European Union back then, what they do actually, because you can't really sanction like that. The thing with political unions or joining these unions is that it's also a democratic process. People need to choose. That's the thing. You can't tell somebody if they're not your friend again that you're going to kill them or stuff like that. So, but what some unions do, like the European Union, what they do is to have very rigorous processes that make it difficult for you to pull out. So look at how long it took for the Brexit thing to happen. Even till now, Brexit has not fully materialized, right? There's a lot of things that are still, in the trenches that are still being discussed and all of those things. So the process, they just make it hard so that you disincentivize or deter people. So I think deterrence is a better thing to do than looking for punitive measures. Because once a country has left your union, I'm not sure what you want to do to them. You probably want to stop trading with them and isolate them, right? Well, that might work. I think that's a good sanction, right? That's the kind of sanction we always give anyway. Stop trading with that particular country. But again, like I said, that might work if the country needs you anyway. Imagine if, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, Kenya, and Rwanda pulled out of the AFCFTA, and then Ethiopia and Djibouti and Eritrea will now say, well, we'll stop trading with you. Who cares? You get. So that's why I said you need to have your individual country strong enough that if one wants to pull out, the adverse effect of that pull out is going to be so glaring to them that they're going to reconsider it. But right now, that's why I said in ECOWAS, for example, Nigeria is just like the giant of that system, maybe followed by a wide margin, between them and Ghana. So that's why Nigeria cannot do anything. Even Ghana couldn't really call out Nigeria or Nigeria's president on that border closure back then. And Benin Republic was actually soliciting for Ghana to do that. But yeah, Ghana might be a big country, but not as big as Nigeria. Enough to come and say, you know what, we're going to do something strong to you if you don't open the border for Benin Republic to sell their tomatoes. So yeah, those are some of the sanctions. The sanctions have to be economic, and you can't go to war with them over the fact that they stop being in your union. But yeah, you can do economic sanctions. I think that's like the answer I have to that question. Okay. Thank you guys very much for the questions and the engaging sessions. At least now I'm convinced that you were listening and that I actually thought. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Dialectics, for this opportunity.
All right, thank you, Eze. So yeah, we are done for today's session, and see you guys tomorrow.